related to tailings disposal facilities. The moderator, or the Cristiano Montas, Director of Corporate Questions and Sustainability of Mining, Morro do IP. Cristiano, please. As panelists, we will have the Director of Government Social Responsibility of Kinross, Coordinator of ESG of IBRAM, Amaria Ferreira Cunha. The Director of GWS Engenharia, Lucas Samuel Santos, Brazil. And the Director of Communication and Projects of IBRAM, Paulo Leois Soares. I thank you for you being here, and I pass the floor to Cristiano to chair this panel. Over to you, Cristiano. Good morning. For me, it's a great honor to be here, to coordinate this. I don't know if I thank Fernando, Julio, Aline, who put me into this situation here, or I twist the necks, but let's move on. I would like to greet the panel colleagues, Ana, Lucas, Paulo, and say that our panel will work as a talk show, and at the end, anybody in the audience who wants to participate with us has a QR code, and the questions can be sent to us through the QR code. I'd also like to greet Roberto, Júnior, the Evandro, Alexandre from Civil Defense, who are with us today, how important it is the production. Have the times of discussion with the public agencies, the agents who are responsible, the response agencies for our moments of crisis, the daily routines of PABM, approving of the flood path. This is a routine that we are all involved with. The panel has the theme Communication and Management of Crisis related to the tailings disposal facilities, and I'm very pleased that communication is winning this role in the corporate area. And it's the first panel in the seminar, which is a traditional seminar held by IBRAM, President Fernando, where we have RIC panels and important exchanges between the public authorities, civil defense, the companies, consultants, enriching all the ecosystem of crisis management. The role of the panel is to discuss the role of communication before, during, and after the crisis. I like Professor Vana Bueno. She has an excellent talk show. I recommend you to watch it. She says, we are communication. Communication, besides what we say, is our behavior. Everything communicates, even what is not said. And I'd like to take advantage. Last weekend, I was able to see a film which is not recent, telling the story of the Princess of Monaco, Grace Kelly. And the film is the time of crisis between Monaco and France. And Grace Kelly, who was already an actress, had received the Oscar, had recognition. She did a course to know how to communicate with Monaco people through the expressions, through the French. She improved her French. That is the importance of communication. And through this set of measures, she was an important part of solving the crisis between Monaco and the French government of President de Gaulle at the time. There's another series, I like series very much, on Netflix. It's recent, telling the stories of the 11th of September. I suggest you watch it. This series, in a certain part, when the attacks are happening, shows George Bush in a children's school, and he receives the information. This is happening. And what is his attitude at that moment? He says, I cannot change anything from the script. I can't show I can't have a strong reaction. The crisis outside is bad enough. My reaction here could communicate. We could bring about another crisis within the crisis. So there are examples, and crisis management is very wide and moving away from the mining stories to show the importance of communication in crisis management. And we have the accidents that happened, Mariana, Brumadinho, and since then we have many measures, many stories, and a lot of learning to share. So I'd like to begin provoking our debaters. I'd like to leave them free to add to the answers from each other. How do you assess the evolution of mining in communication, in crisis management over the last years? What have we learned and how far have we evolved? Begin with Ana Cunha here. Have we moved forward? Were we disruptive? Well, good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank IBRAM for the invitation. It's always a joy to be here. We're saying that Paulo and I, in this path, we've never been together on a panel. For me, it's an honor to be all with you, but Paulo, in fact, is a reference to us in communication. It will be difficult here, but answering your question, Cristiano, I think we are not disruptive. Let's be very direct. And our industry is very conservative. I say we have allergy to the word revolution. Yes, without any doubt, it has evolved. It's a constant evolution. If we look to secular, a century years old industry and how it's moved forward from the past till now, it's very different from what it was way back in the past, and very different from when I began to work in communication. And I can clearly see the transformation of a discipline of an area that was very much on the periphery in the business. We think of mining, how the communication was before. Was it on demand? And it only existed. We only spoke if we were provoked. In this sense, yes, we have a scenario which is very different, which is the scenario of communication as a connection.
Not as information. I'd like to give you an example. You're talking about TV shows, and I'm also a lot into TV shows and movies. I'd like to give a couple of examples. Well, one, in a good sense of showing the actual difference. If you watch The Crown, there is a certain episode where they tell the case of the coal mine collapse in England. And there you see a great picture of how we used to communicate. They took a lot of days to go to the town, the Prime Minister and the Queen back then, thinking that they should not expose themselves, they should not be there. And I think it takes like 5 days to go there, to understand what had happened, to apologize, whatever. I think this is the classic communication model, the old one. And of course, besides communicating only on demand, there's also a fear of communicating, fear of talking, fear of exposure has always been behind the way that the industry takes a stance on this topic. Now let's go back to the early days. We communicated on demand, stemming from needs, very technically, and in a not very understandable way, not very clear one. You might tell yourself, well, I've always communicated, every report was available, the communication was available in that 1,000-page report, it's public, anybody can go there and extract the information. No, that's data, it's not communication. This is a big paradigm shift that I think we managed to implement. We know now that data is not communication. Data without context does not connect, does not communicate, does not bring legitimacy, and does not generate trust. And I believe if we look at the last 2 decades, but especially the last decade, I see that we have been building trust, and by that I mean what generates engagement and trust is the communication that's not one-sided, but it's built alongside the stakeholders, all the stakeholders. When you have all the other stakeholders engaged in the communication, you're also going to create communication from your own communication. And I believe that this has been the great change if we look at it, from our industry's perspective. This is a scenario where you're just another party among many different stakeholders and players. You're not only there to serve one interest. We're not here to talk about what we want, the way we want, when we want. I think this is now old news. It's how we have been taking a stance. Now it's more dialogical stance. Yes, very nice, very well put. It goes way beyond rhetoric. And look, let's change a little bit of paradigm. We're going to a direction of creating a preventative culture in terms of safety. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting me here today. I'm very happy to be here with you all. Certainly, I would say it's a change of levels. We need to think about it differently. From the standpoint of iterations, this is a continuous process. We need to continuously exercise that. And the interactions associated to everybody involved. Either the technical group, for example, the first responders or the emergency responders. We have many representatives here in the audience. They are the audience that's the most interested, and they need to receive accurate information. The change of levels is in the level of communication and the way we communicate. In the last few years, this was a significant change, a change in language so that we can bring all the stakeholders closer together. We've been seeing this need of actually having a communication that engages. We need to talk about emergency and generation of trust at the same time. And in order to build that trust, it's important that we actually have a process implemented to build maturity for safety. Transparency is a key word here. It needs to be the foundation. It's important for us to work with performance prediction and to talk about risk for everybody involved is something that we need to do. To talk about safety and telling everybody that it's safe 100% of the time is simplifying a very complex process. It's important for us to know about this. It's important for us to communicate this fact. And a lot of technicians here in the audience today had the need to do that in the last few years, to bring a complex process and to translate that at the same time that you're building this risk perception, which is a performance indicator. When I say that we are in the interaction level with either with a public agent or with somebody else like the community or layman's, we need to bring this overview to all of them, to let them know that there is a process and this process is monitored, is managed and maintained. But we are here to show you that there are also risks. This takes time, and this gives you a buffer of trust that needs to be maintained. The conditioning about this topic, I think it's something that's going to be focused forever. It's going to be under the spotlight. and it needs to be something that's talked about in the mining industry continuously. I agree with Anna. It's not disruptive. We are a very traditional industry in this sense, but this doesn't mean that today we aren't any more open. We are more open now than we used to be. We need to talk about it more openly. And it might sound we're talking only about dams, but that's not true. We're undergoing a transition when it comes to disposal. When we talk about facilities for disposal, we need to also talk about the stacks, piles, dumps, everything. When we gain safety and maturity about the disposal methods, we're adding to our safety. But there are also risks related to those structures, regardless of the accidents we've seen in the past, in the recent past. And these structures with high technological control, they still have some residual risk that needs to be addressed and communicated by everybody involved. And the communication methods during the last few years brings a more significant range so that we can build perenniality in the territories along the way. That's something that we've also seen, but in a very clear and transparent way. There is a series of challenges and room for improvement, and this is my point of view. But there's a series of questions when we talk about crisis. It's not only something that we are going to solve in a matter of hours. It's a situation today. Any issue involving dams involves the memory of the recent past, the two accidents that we saw. So if I'm communicating, somebody's already publishing on WhatsApp or on social media, and I don't have an opportunity to actually respond to that edit, the dynamics become a lot quicker in this sense. But it's important for us to note that coherence, repetition, and the message that actually brings the true message is a factor of change, so that we can build this process where we have opportunity to keep on operating. And myself as a technician, I would be bold enough to say that we end up working with those topics for over a decade, but we learn a lot in this sense, and this allows us to notice that we need to expand this concept so that the technical department also has the opportunity of taking a stance. And one of those stances that are important is to keep on saying that dams are important. They need to keep on existing. We cannot penalize them. Geotechnical structures are important to our operations. So to answer your question, Cristiano, there has been a change. There have been lessons learned. There is room for improvement. When you talk about risk management for events with a very significant time frame, and it's important for us to note, for example, it's not something that we solve in a matter of hours, but when you have an event, we need to notice people, how they're going to behave over time, how they're going to withstand pressure and change, and the effort that they're going to undertake. But this whole level of trust, depending on the magnitude of the occurrence, is unfolded in a few hours. Maybe it's not only about you, you're replaced by other people with the capacity of performing accurate communication. These are the challenges we need to work out when it comes to managing crises over time for those accidents that could happen in our industry, especially dams and geotechnical structures. Very well put. Very well put, Lucas. I see that Paulo Assis is here in the audience from Minas. It's that old history, the engineers communicating. Engineering, understanding that they need to communicate clearly, accessibly, and broadly with their territory and the communities. Paulo, you have a long history with communication, many cases, many life situations, and a very rich perception about these dynamics. What is your perception? Does the mineral sector, is the mineral sector making any progress in crisis management? Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to my colleagues here to choose me for this panel. I wasn't lobbying for that, but I'm happy to be here. First, we need to make it really clear that the world has changed. Unlike perhaps some things that Julio learned in college and Lina, and whoever is there now learning mining, it's very close, but the agility of the change of communicational process is huge due to technology. Everybody, all of the time, what I learned in school, years later, and I learned in school, is not our reality now. If anybody here is over 30 years old, I believe most of us are, we were not born in the technological era, the digital era. And this makes a whole difference, and this changes communication as well. When I joined mining 30 years ago, if I didn't want to communicate, I wouldn't. I would, be a black box in my own company. I would go, I'm not going to make a statement about this topic. Now we do not have this option anymore. Not because I don't want or Anna doesn't want, because the world has changed. And if the world has changed, for example, I worked in Carajás. We used the letter system back then. And sometimes to make a phone call, you'd have to ask for it in the morning and wait for the afternoon to do that. This reality is no longer. What has changed from the communication standpoint that pressures all of the society to change is this right here. First, the internet connection, now is the smartphone. This smartphone that we all have, at least one of those, allows us to stay connected, to film, take photos, post, comment 24 hours a day, and this changed the world. This means that we need to adjust. We're not Coca-Cola, we're not consumable, we're not agribusiness, because everybody, they like to go, agribusiness is pop, but communication isn't. These are different things, and because they are, the process of communication needs to be engaged differently. Nobody goes to the supermarket and buys 1 kilo of manganese. Nobody goes to the bakery and buys a gold bar. It's not a directly consumable good. But we've changed, we've improved, we have extremely well-qualified communication professionals. We have communication processes that are really well designed. However, we are still living in the old mining world with features that other sectors don't have. We have a territorial presence that's huge. We change the territories a lot more than other industries do. Wherever you go, you're going to transform, you're going to develop economically the territory, you're going to generate jobs and create opportunities. But on the other hand, you're going to impact the life of the community, which used to be one way, and oftentimes, but not necessarily, people want to have this quote-unquote evolution, because some people could go, I don't want that, I don't want my city to grow, I don't want paved roads, I want it to be the same old town where I was born and raised. There is this paradox, and we always think that our point of view is the one that should be prevailing. So communication or relationship, that's the mastermind of relationships. I think there are two things here. The first is to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Because if you don't do that, you're going to think your point of view is always right. We need to get off our high horses and put ourselves in each other's shoes. The second thing is communication. I used to think it was about talking, but it's always to listen. We think that we have a megaphone and I should just talk. Well, but I have talked. The simple fact that I am issuing a message does not mean that the other party has understood, and worse or better, that they agree. It's not because I'm saying something that other people are agreeing. So I do think that we have a lot of changes, technology and opportunities, but we need to maintain our relationships in our daily routine, and well done. We need to build that relationship because one day we're going to break that relationship up and we're going to have to spend all the savings that we made. Relationships, communication, is not performed during crisis. This is something that you build over time. And usually, us in the industry, we go through the place and community, they are there all the time. We are always changing, we are always having a new stakeholder, new communities, and this ends up allowing us, avoiding us from, keeping us from building those bonds. We need to place ourselves in their places, in their shoes to improve our communication. It's really easy to delegate the responsibility to a professional or a department, but what matters in communication is what we are communicating and to whom we are communicating, why we are communicating. Usually, we expect them to be good news, but oftentimes they are bad news. So you blame the communication process. That's what we call, Cristiano, the crisis of crisis within a crisis in communication. Nobody is discussing the facts. They're discussing why it was published in the papers. And today, in legacy media, to us, it doesn't matter. It used to matter a lot, but if you're over 30, you don't even know what's legacy media, you don't watch it. You only look at TikTok, Instagram. So that's another paradigm shift. We need to think more about the fact rather than the communication process. If it's bad news, it's going to be bad regardless because it's bad news. But if it's bad news, it's impossible for us not to improve, the news, but explain better, clarify better, and try to build an internal alliance for us to manage to have good external relationship. If it's good news, great, but oftentimes even good news become bad news. And why is that? Because of the way we communicate. Everybody, when they talk about a project, they go, oh, they generate the jobs and tax revenue. But hold on, tax revenue is not something that's exclusive to us. Us people, we pay taxes, and generating jobs, we do that in order to generate, to give back. But let's go beyond that. Every time we introduce ourselves as an economical entity in the territory, the feedback will be only economical. We're going to be seen as a bank. Not a bank, maybe, but a project that needs to give things. And why is that? Because that's how we introduce ourselves. Maybe we should review how we introduce ourselves or why we're in that territory, what's our role there, because if you're going to generate financial resources, you're going to be seen as a financial resources machine. A good piece of information, if not well addressed, will not be properly understood. Paulo, I'd like to add something. You talked about the communication that changes because of technology and all the tools such as smartphones. And this is something that's also coupled with the change of awareness in society today. We have communication tools that connect us, but we also have a society which is no longer willing to look at the tax revenue or job generation. They're more aware of their rights and more aware and willing to be part of the decision-making process. When we think about the communication process, the challenges we had of change over time, I'd like to also think that these challenges brought more opportunities for our industry to take a better stance on these aspects. I'm also from another time I began working in the north in an operation that was inserted in a very isolated territory in the middle of the Amazon jungle, but we didn't have to talk to anyone, absolutely no one, only to our employees and only what we wanted. There wasn't anyone, there was no TV or communities protesting. But it's important for us to think that these are customs, and on an evolution standpoint, customs changed, society changed. This gave us the opportunity of being a better industry that thinks about the impact it generates and that actually develops today more tools and mechanisms for integration and active listening. If we look within the communication processes, that's true as well. I'm looking at Danielle here in the audience. We work together at Kinross. It's hard to think about dam management without thinking and discerning in the communication and relationship among all the stakeholders. We, in fact, live a place where the areas, the operations, wherever we need to communicate such and such as if we were in a bakery. It's just saying something for communication and relationship as fundamental strategy for the success of that operation. Today, in fact, I see that communication is the backbone for the assurance, validation, and support of the daily operation wherever it happens, with a strategical outlook. And to wrap it up, this change process, and we have here a lawyer talking about communication, that's a sign of change, or isn't it? It's a lot of evolution. I'd like to also add and bring Lucas into the debate. We talk about risk and crisis. Let's divide things here. As Anna said, I'm going to give you a piece of data. I've been working in this industry for 30 years, until 21 years in this industry when I was in Vale, until the dam break of the Mariana Dam. As a communication professional, I hadn't produced or done any material as simple as it could be about dams. And to me, this is a diagnostics that we need to understand. Okay, these are facilities that are in the operation, they are under the owner's responsibility, but they are facilities with a huge impact. When we talk about risk, we need to understand that we need to talk about our risks. We need to involve every stakeholder in order to address these risks. Because if we don't do that, we are under an enormous risk of whenever there is a crisis, the response will not be adequate. And then unfortunately, and the civil defense folks present here will not like this, we're not in a preventative culture. Brazilians are not like that. However, we can change cultures. unlike, for example, I could use Chile's example or Japan, where due to natural questions, that society had to be trained and qualified to respond to that fact, such as earthquakes. They know what to do in case of an earthquake or a tsunami. They learn that since they're young, but not in Brazil. For all of the risks, let's take an extreme risk. If you're mugged in the streets, maybe us Brazilians will not be as mugged as often because we pay attention. If a colleague that comes from Australia is here, they're not going to be, paying attention to that as much as we do. So they're under higher risk. But Brazilians know how to behave because we live this violence. But not Australians or Europeans. If they go to Europe, for example, people are not frequently mugged in the streets, but Brazilians are going to find that natural. Unfortunately, we will. We need to change this culture. We need to implement the prevention culture, not only in mining, but for everything. And the last point, and then I'm going to pass the mic here. But whenever something happens, we need to remember that society, the fact has happened. A plane has crashed, for example, and after the crash, society is going to judge, to assess how that company reacted to the fact, because the fact has already happened. There's nothing to add to that anymore. And the same is true in case of a dam rig or any kind of emergency that we have to work with. The fact has happened, and that's how society is going to act. They're no longer judging you on the fact, but on how you respond to the fact, and that's why we need to be ready. And there's only one way out. You need to practice, write, to talk, and prepare yourself for that moment. It's better to be prepared than being caught off guard. Surely, if you have not thought about it, your reaction will not be the most adequate.
Quick comment here. We talk about activity. Have less experience. Besides, I'm younger anyway, with the experience. But the fact is, various lessons learned. One of them is the view of externality, thinking about self-saving, self-rescue zone to show a flood path which has a extension of 200 kilometers in the municipalities where you have no interaction and you have to do some kind of interaction to be able to show the consequences. It is a challenge, a big challenge. So, Paulo, your point, a few points you said and added in this sense. Talk about preparation is essential with communication. It is the mattress we have. Anna was saying this before. We have to build this mattress. Preparation. There's some interesting numbers here. UN says that every dollar I spent, I avoid 7 in recovery. The Federal Herrada, in a recent lecture, he says that 1 to 8, 1 to 12, depending on the type of territory, if it's a rural area or if it's urban area. But the fact is that we have to work in the essence of the cycle for preparation as the risks mapped, communicating the risks in a clear way. The construction of trust involves the clarity of the risks that I have. Speaking about operations in the mineral sector, it's talking about complexity. Our processes are complex, and there has to be a lot of people assessing it. And the cultural construction in a process, until a few recent years ago, we hadn't have clearly defined. It was from 2017 till now, the concept, institutional concept, and a norm with regard to the self-rescue zone inside Brazil. Since 2017, the DMPM, ANM today, has this concept, and we begin to have put the process. It's a change of our mindset. What we need, and of course, we need a number of questions occurring that had to be reviewed. from the point of view of the intensity, the cycle of interactions. Sometimes we had communications. A few years ago, we thought this will be done in the next 10, 15 years, and so it had to be done in a few months. So in fact, it is a change that we have to have. It's consistency and discipline to give long life in simple processes. When we have interactions, and of course the examples of the Emergency Action Plan, PABM, within what legislation asks, they bring a lot of learning. To talk about guidance seminars where a technician has to be showing technical information with a non-technical speech to bring belonging, the process is a process that has to be built by all, and we need, as you commented, have to listen. How many forums have we had an opportunity to get into where, way in the back, we had people, 30, 40 people who is a considerable number when we talk about this. There are very few people, 3, 4, 5, but then there's the community leader raises the hand and says, I didn't understand anything what you said. And it's been, meeting has already run for 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And you have to repeat everything, bring it closer for a better understanding for the expectation. It is a central part of the process. Community leader who influences everybody there. They have to have a clear understanding. And we see, in terms of learning, that we have to adapt forums, specific forums for each of these. We need to have the understanding of the mapping of the audiences to have effectiveness in the terms of construction, communication becoming a tool in this stage, pre-crisis or preparation, because it brings effectiveness to the process as a whole. It's the mattress, as you said, Anna, this mattress that we have to build. We're talking about communications of crisis, but the communication shouldn't be for the crisis. Communication should be, it is involved in the dynamics of the routine of an operation of this complexity. Very good, Anna. Communication process, continuous process that always existed. I would like to pick up on what Lucas said, coming back to Professor Vane Bueno. She has an interesting speech where she says, we see things not as they are, but we see things as we are. And empathy, listening, includes not using other people's shoes, but use the lens of others, how the person sees the situation. It's very different from ours. And moving to the second block, communication as a discipline has codes and norms, what, how, and when to communicate. The good rules guide about the importance of the spokesperson. We said a lot about humanization of discourse and the importance of coherence between discourse and practice. Walk the talk. People don't just want rhetoric, they want practice. What do we do when the crisis brings the unexpected, which is not in any code? How do we communicate with somebody who, during the evacuation, gets with a chicken under their arm? How do you prepare the mattress, Lucas? How do we buy the necessary mattress for the couple to spend the night out the house? That long set of approvals, internals, are necessary for this is carried out. How are we preparing for the unthinkable, beginning with Lucas? How is leading with supplies at this moment, Lucas? Let's comment first. These words catch us out. The unthinkable, the unforeseen. Being very transparent but mature at the same time. Unthinkable, unexpected. It says more about our lack of preparation, we were talking about this, than anything else. Because today we have a need to map, a more extensive mapping. What have we seen in terms of learning? And training is important. Have this understanding. It's look at realistic scenarios on this theme. Sometimes we have scenarios which are very simple. We think we're creating some indicators, but we're not necessarily going to the heart, make people ready, whether the gates inwards or outwards. Here, there is a suggestion for us we can think about. We have to emphasize the process to bring human behavior into the process. The great failures we have seen, which are opportunities to intensify training, is to strengthen human behavior given these situations, and within a controlled environment in a short time, we compact a given situation which might happen days, weeks, or months, and we compact it into a few hours. You get the human behavior. It's the crisis in the crisis. And you see a spokesperson who is trained with media training, but at that moment they don't know how to behave, or a senior leader who within the training itself in the end they say, well, they know they're not ready for the process that they need to get better training, or areas in the company itself we see disconnects, completely different views with regard to this theme. And communication, in the end, is the weak link in the process. Then I have a mindset. I'm from one area. The other area thinks differently. There is a process which is well defined. I'm going to give an example of supplies, since you raised, right, Cristiano? You have to have a process which is built to meet in the right time. Not too fast, in this sense, to be able to do it organically. I say that things will happen. You are going to manage to solve it. The question is, what's the cost? What's the cost for this to happen? It will happen organically. That is, I begin to call everybody, I begin to communicate everybody. But what is the effectiveness of the process? I have to have a system and a connection for seeing this process as a whole. What can happen? What is the human behavior? What is the process? There arose here a reminder, when we get the norms, for example, of civil state defense here, they created a pre-movement. I believe this forum, if not all of them, most of them have thought about this. Why pre-movement time? And of course, it depends a lot on civil defense. They draw on knowledge and the specificity of the fire brigade from the point of view of evacuation of large groups of people in certain places, whereas this is a stadium here, for example. We have the human factor from the point of view of behavior, of doubting. That's natural. Anybody doubts. In Brazil, we can say, for example, whoever failed to doubt of an evacuation siren? Wait a minute, should we leave? Well, no, wait a minute, see what's happening first. And so 5 minutes go by, 10 minutes go by, 15 minutes. This pre-movement time is to be able to pick up our human behavior. And again, our chances of making a mistake, if we don't do it before, if we don't think ahead, it grows very significantly. So it is important for us to see the human behavior, having an understanding of the territory, of the technical area in the company, the public agencies that have the technical, but we should be prepared jointly for seeing these behaviors, seeing the community. We had a case recently in training for evacuation. We had, obviously, we had already done all the preparation for it, and we had to remove people who were in the site. We hadn't looked at a significant characteristic of a person who would only leave if they took away their fear. I only leave if you take the saint with me, the idol with me, a little altar. But there was the need of a team, a further team, another 2 people to take they had to take their saint with them. This mapping, these characteristics, and this behavior, this human factor, has to be considered within the movement. It has to be permeated in the communication process. Again, we reduce this unexpected, this requirement of that which we would say is random. Now, coming back to supplies, so as I don't get lost here, we have to, when we talk about technical processes in the companies, that these technical processes have quick paths, quick flows, and they have to be tested. How quickly can I mobilize to buy a certain resource? This has already happened. It's already happened. You have to give me this resource within so many hours. Otherwise, there will be a penalty with regard to this. Can I get this resource? How is this resource included? Where will this resource come from? They raise questions. Various technicians say this. Structures, level 3, talking about crisis in the crisis, something I have to access remotely. Where does the technology come from? Where does the resource come from? How do I make it operational to be able to access remotely that facility? When we get big challenges, we need great solutions as well. And we need new, again, it has to be, we have to have an answer. One thing that's the seed that we try to plant in everybody in the different views is to see that I need to do a number of questions. And if I have an event on a Saturday, early hours, and the end door is a geotechnical monitoring center, the technician has the capacity to respond in time that problem out of the administrative hours. What tests am I doing with this team, which is the entry for a process such as this? Is somebody doing these tests? So there are questions that we need to put up and see if we have the adequate responses in building maturity. And see again, the communication is connecting all these processes. It's not strengthened. We, in the end, do it. But again, the question, rhetorical question, but what's the cost? Great. And Paulo, coming back to your story, your rich path in the mining sector, do we know how to collect the saints and the altars that we find every day in the territories? I say that depends. It depends on the people. I won't say names of any companies. Companies are made of people. Those who write the norms, those who decide the norms and the processes are people. We have to have the sensitivity to creating the norm so that we can function. We should consider the improbable, that we consider the kid who carried a chicken, their dear chicken, pet chicken, or the person who says she won't leave if you don't take the saint with her. If we think and plan this, we know how to do this very well. I believe we are better prepared for this. Areas like legal, communication, human resources, supplies have to be more human, determining the processes and thinking in a more collective and systemic way, and less in what is based on mining. I have to think about what, for me or for my company. Yes, we need create this culture of autonomy in cases where it's necessary. Let me get 2 examples which are very basic. An air company like Southwest, a low-cost airline in the States. That is the idea of GO, which didn't happen in Brazil, but the employees have autonomy to make decisions. And there's a report that somebody who could take a dog on the plane, but the plane couldn't have a dog because it wasn't pressurized and so on. And the person says, I'm going on holiday. I'm going to be away 2 weeks. Am I going to lose my holiday? And the person at the desk said, no. Are you going to come back to the same airport? I'll keep your dog for you. You're going to say, wait a minute, they did this because somebody or the supervisor was next to them? No. They have a higher salary? No. Actually, the salary of Southwest is below the average of the other large companies in America. Because there's a culture, there's a trust, and there's a person there making decisions for people. So, this is an example that we should carry, that we should make decisions thinking about people, the norm says you cannot carry a saint, so you will not take your saint with you. Is that it? Is that it? Because the norm says that? So we have to be more human, creating the norms and the rules. And actions have to be based on this, and based also on a culture of prevention, on a culture of planning. Here I pick up an example of Go and TAM. It wasn't LATAM. When the airlines, we had aircraft, one of Go and LATAM, had crashed in a short period. I was able to study both cases from the point of view of reaction of the companies. And I was really shocked because the result that we saw was that Go managed the case of the fall of a Boeing, and LATAM didn't know how to manage the plane that crashed in São Paulo. Let me give you some data. Did you know that Go in that time had a team ready on every week? That is, if there were any emergency, there was a person named from each key area who was on duty. The people from communication said they had to have a bag with a manual, with a computer, battery, with a uniform, with a hard hat, because they might need it. In the case of LATAM, the person who managed the crisis of the South, the plane left Porto Alegre, was inside the flight. And there wasn't a substitute. What is that? That is prevention. Well, Paulo, coming back to the series, LATAM is on Netflix. Anybody wants to see that episode? It's very interesting. I think there are 3 episodes showing precisely how not to do crisis communication and the learning from then on. I think although very recent, very up-to-date, we make basic errors. One case here on prevention, just not to lose it, FedEx in the United States. They have an extra flight in each coast of the States. If a plane doesn't take off or has a technical problem, they can quickly substitute it. That is cost, but that is prevention. That is to plan and say, no, I will have this cost a plane on standby on each side of the states in case if there's any breakdown, which is possible, might happen, the delivery to my customers is not delay. This, for me, is fantastic. Another data is that in some American airports where there was no blizzard, snow blizzard, Arizona, they also have the equipment to take the ice off the wings of planes. You say, no, possible? That's prevention. Because what if there is a snowstorm that was not expected? You can... Are we thinking about this? Or are we doing, what a mattress is? Do I have to buy a mattress? Do I let the chicken go or don't I let the chicken go? Will I have the money to pay the feed for the chicken? It's an absurd us to think like this. Sorry, Anna. Anna, now passing back to you. We know. Can we get the ice off the wings of the planes? What does this process look like, especially big companies with protocols, legal department, and how communication can get lost in this path? We're full of metaphors today, right? But thinking on the chicken, under the arm of the boy, and the ice on the plane, or the idol, I'd like to go back to the example you gave, without disagreeing but agreeing. I think it is... I have a slightly different view about empathy and putting on other people's shoes. Jamila Ribeiro has an idea about empathy. There she says that empathy has to be intellectual. When she says this, she is saying that If, in fact, we know the story, the concepts, the path, what defines the beliefs of others, because there is also a question of intellectual respect. And so if I, in fact, have this, I have an action which is completely different when I think of the altar of somebody, what that altar means to that person, or I can go for my empathy in the concept, not say it makes no sense for me there, because the putting on other people's shoes, Julio Uvelan put on my shoes, certainly it won't work. It's not going to work. Something there, that is, it won't have the same perception that I have when I'm using these shoes. I'm unable have an intellectual empathy, but then we are listening, we actively seeking to know what we have research, I do modeling, talking, I have several bits of data where people can express their opinion. What am I doing with this? Am I putting it in a drawer? Am I making decisions from my perception? Connecting with what Paulo said, there's something that when I in fact consider that what the other sees, I have to give up power. Power is something we don't talk a lot about. It's very much inserted in this context. Okay, you can say what you like, I can hear you, but when you make a decision, I make the decision. I will make the investment. I'm not going to buy this mattress, or I'm not. If the sirens ring, you say you need this because you've impact, but I think, no, you don't need that, and I'm not going to send what you asked for. So I think we still need to get rid of a few concepts and some attitudes or positions in the dynamic of considering what others bring and what they consider. Otherwise, we are still looking from our point of view, from our practice, and how we want to do things. Going back to the first question, we've moved forward in this sense, but we still occupy, or in general, a place of protagonism. And the position of protagonist, it is the place of joint construction. Great, thank you. I have received several questions from the audience. That's great. It shows that people are interested, and there is a question of Rodrigo Eduardo that has to do with my last speech here, the challenges of communication in the modern world. We live in a world today which is hyperconnected, as Professor Patricia Marin said, well beyond media training. It doesn't exist. We're always on, as says, we are already in the social media, we are already in the world. We never had so many means of communication as we have today. Networks, artificial intelligence, in a polarized world and a permanent crisis. How do we use this set of tools so that communication can be a tool of prevention of crisis and reconstruction of trust and post-crisis? Especially, I asked to begin again to talk to Anna to share a bit the gaze of the community on this theme. Let me go back to what I was saying and the concept that Paulo said of autonomy. I think the concept of autonomy is valid both for the people who head up the processes inside the companies, but also to the community. When we think of this participative management in possible models of construction of a culture of prevention, I'd like to bring a bit of the example of how We have done this over the years in the territory where we are today, in Paracatu, thinking that this is a linear process and it needs construction and has to be seen and translated in a routine way and not as an exceptionality. Paulo said we don't have a culture of accidents. I think we have to, not accidents, no, we don't, of prevention. We have to deal with this in a way that is inserted in a routine. We began to do work there of listening to the communities and seeing what made sense to the community inside this concept. And jointly, we understood we had a great opportunity to transform this discussion into a discussion which is prevention of the risk of the life of those communities. As Paulo says, we have the risk in a car, in the home. All everything's a risk. The risk can't be seen. It is a risk of the dam breaking. No, they have to be prepared for the risk of the fire. It's an area that we live from a lot of areas with fires. It is the risk of blasting, the risk of a lot of rain, for example, flooding, dust. We began to do work on this participative model with the fire brigade, civil defense, community. Today, we have a model to train fire brigade, community fire brigade people. They are trained, they participate in courses every year with the fire brigade and all the other entities for prevention and looking at different risks. This was brought to these communities, the theme, as a theme which is more normalized in their routine. It makes a difference being in a territory where you have a mutual help plan, where you have different companies and entities thinking about prevention and forms of prevention all the time. In our context, in self-saving, there's a school that also was part of this process of training. So there's an annual calendar for training, not of the teachers, but of the students on this theme. This is very important. Also, at their request, it is in the emergency evacuation that we do every year. At their request, we began to do the exercises in more hostile moments, end of the day, rainy season, beginning of the evening, so that, in fact, the exercises had greater complexity. At the same time, we didn't do the show exercise. The companies began this doing league events with a show, with those great tents, as if that was a party and not as if that were the routine of a community that has to deal with that as normal. So we are now working in a way that we give them information, say when it will be, we do the exercise in a very simple way, twice, so that to be inserted into the routine of the community. If we don't want the exceptional situation, if we don't want this to be seen as an exceptional situation, we also cannot make of it a show and an exception. We have to treat this as an exercise that we do in our operations for evacuations or tests of sirens, of emergency tests of fire, which happens on the calendar. You are told you participate because you know what the procedures are and how you will do it. I think it was a great evolution, the way how we began to see this at the beginning, and today we see it in a completely different way.
And then this begs two questions that match what you just said about the big events. Paulo has a different question. Maria Eduarda from Vale also asked a question about how do we use communication to avoid those simulated events become empty. I'd like to invite Lucas to talk about it, about this exercise, international standards, the TSM, GISTM. Can I just say something before Lucas responds? It's tough to deal with communicators, right? Maria Eduardo's question, I think it's because it's important to know the number of people that are part of the drill specifically, but if you have a communication routine, you talk about the topic, this is even more important than the actual number where you just tick a box on the day of the drill. That's true, Anna, but I'd like to also comment on that, expand on that a little bit. There's no right answer, but there is a need for us to discuss this with more time and with a more granular fashion, which would allow us to create more representative indicators. We have opportunities in life. We've had the opportunity, well, making an analogy with the nuclear sector, you go to Angersdorf's race, they have emergency drills there since the mid-80s. We're talking about 40 years of drills. They have theoretical drills, practical drills, and the main question that was asked a few years ago was engagement. Engagement drops over time, and this is natural in a way. And the question that remains, a rhetorical one, is that the process in the construction of the process or a snapshot of the moment. If the process is well built with previous engagement, sectorized, compartmentalized, customized, whether it's a rural or urban area and so forth, the construction of the process is what needs to be assessed and not the type or the day, because we could be doing that in a weekday, a Thursday, with it's a rainy day, close to lunch. I'm not leaving home. I'm cooking my own lunch. I'm not going to leave home because I know where the meeting point is. The construction of the process, and that's something that I'd like to connect with the communication. It needs to account for all of the stages of communication and not to focus only on that activity on that day, that moment. The justification is mostly about construction and systems than the activity. But once again, I strongly recommend that we hold more forums, more meetings for us to work that out. With more transparency and maturity, I believe that we could ask ourselves, what if we add a certain stimulus there? Or you go there, you're going to get something from it. Or if you go to the meeting point, you get a free consultation, like a gamification, or to offer benefits to people for attending. Is this a way to improve engagement, or are we just hiding things? It's important for us to know that. And then to talk about best practices, I made a suggestion for us to stay on that topic. I'm going to mention the opportunities we have here. We've seen the GISTM as a best practice in this sense. The 14th principle of the recovery plan, for example, this ostensive overview of the construction. GISTM is a fundamental concept. The fundamental concept of the GISTM is the joint construction. People need to be a part of the process, all the stakeholders, and we need to build it with a very significant timeline. When we talk about crisis, you should note that when we fail, it's not because I didn't carry out an activity at that moment, but because today's, next week's, next month's, next year's, in a significant time frame. And we only fail, we don't fail alone. Let's say there's an incident that you need to remain engaged with the company for 3 days. Just an example. And when you go back home, your daughter will not allow you to go back, your wife, your partner. They're going to go, you're not going back. Look at your state. Or you have the human factor. People have burnouts and they maybe will not come back. Then you lose a senior leader. They will not go back. We need to realize this over time. And the best practices in GISTM address this. How can we add further maturity over time in the recovery plan is an example. Connecting that with the emergency plans, we always suggest, and we suggest that, okay, you're nominally mentioned in the plan, you have a series of general responsibilities. So let's run a 5W2H here about how do you operationalize your responsibilities, the general ones, in an emergency response plan. How do you do that? How do you deal with that over time? What are the resources? And then note, and I'm hailing the civil defense folks here, to talk about resources, it's talking about every party, because you need, if I'm talking about a backhoe, I need an operator, I need fuel. It's not only about the backhoe. There's this whole set of things that are needed. And this action, in a cyclic manner, it's very interesting. It goes beyond the current status quo. And note that it's on a whole new level. And that's my own perception. It's my point of view. We can't let the ball drop. We need to keep on having these things being done. Of course, we have priorities, but we need to bring typology for each territory. We need to bring further maturity to those processes so that they are once again built previously with good preparation, with good use of resources, and creating a construction systematics. It's important for us to connect to that when we talk about crisis and communication, which is something that's present along all of the process. Very, very well put, Lucas and Paulo. Is this industry using those new tools to fight fake news, disinformation, and to overcome all those challenges? I think the industry has been learning, has been using. And once again, it's not only a matter of communicating. Communicating is part of the process. As it's been said here, if nothing is done, our plan is just delegating, we could, well, to answer the question, it was asked about emptying the process. Well, the first is not a communication matter. I always say that if somebody tells you that's a communication problem, you only have one certainty, it's not a communication problem. They want to delegate this problem to something that's not a communication problem. But we need to understand the process, to understand the parties involved. Was I used to, making a show of it? Was there a tent? Or would I buy people's participation with gamification, music? Because this is so cool. But then when you no longer offer that, people will go, I don't want to go. Then we need to understand why we're doing that. And communication is relevance. If it's not relevant to me, I will never pay attention in something that there isn't any attractiveness. I have no interest for such topic. Well, I could give you all of the information. I'm not going to use it because it's not interesting to you. Horse races, for example. I don't like it, for example. Let's talk about horse racing or betting on horses. I think we can't do that anymore. Well, I don't like horse racing. But if I find something that's relevant and that's important, then you can participate. But it's more difficult, especially when we're talking about something that's going to fiddle with the person. Can you imagine today, if you're living near a dam, they had all their assets damaged. Nobody wants to buy that house. The prices went down because you were in that place that you've always been. And something happened that brought the prices down. We need to understand that we need to be more involved. It's more than just, a leaflet or a speaker car. Because it's the goal and the company told me to do it and I need to take a picture for the report. What we need to do is to show and teach those people that they need to know that in case if something goes wrong, what to do. That's what success means to us. It's not whether 10 or 20 people were participating, because we could, have 100 people participating, and in case there is an emergency, if they don't know what to do, my work's not, it's not good enough. The indicator for success is not how many people are there. It's not a tent or a car. It's whether I had people engaging. That's the purpose. And we sometimes take our eyes off the objective. We only look at the media. Media gives me a nice report. It gives me a good product to deliver, a good deliverable. But at what cost? What was the result? It was said here, and a lot of you in communication are used, and you think that we are spokespeople. We're the ones speaking on behalf of the company, or we provide consultancy to those that are speaking on behalf of the company. Our communication, I don't know if you have somebody there in your company that does only that, but do you remember that more than a spokesperson, we are bearers of other people's voices. And as well, my role for any communications professional is not to repeat what the company wants us to repeat, but to bring other people's voices to the group so that we can, in a way, modify or do it better. Bringing other people's voices, it is something that is, weird sometimes. It may feel weird. You put a photo on the wall and you can tell people everybody was a part of the drill, but telling them that we have a problem, we could not engage with that community. That's my role. That's Anna's role. That's the role of every communication professional. And then the company, not Anna or myself, they're gonna have to sit down and discuss why this is happening. Something's happening. If we're not managing to show them what's important, that it's important for them to know what to do in case of an emergency, we have a problem. Because it's their lives, their assets, their families. I want to help them. And why don't they want to be a part of it? We have a problem there. And that's where we need to work. It's something that we need to address. For example, if you have a fever, you're taking NSAIDs. It's just an analogy, but if you look at it this way, you're going to have drills with little attendance and a lot of things going wrong. I'm part of a community where we have mining. I never learned so much in my life being a hidden entity when it comes to understanding the view of those people on the mineral sector. It's the biggest lesson I've learned in my life, because I was always shielded with a badge and a uniform. I was never a community stakeholder, but I am now, and I understand where noise happens. I understand how we lose trust. You know how? When we promise things we can't deliver. When I speak half-truths. When I underestimate other people's intelligence. That's when we lose. But then we go and we say there will be no accidents. Come on. There will be no noise generated. Oh, what? No dust. What? I don't know any activity in the mineral industry in the world that doesn't generate dust, noise, and nuisances. So what we need to do is to minimize. We need to do everything we can to reduce that. And my tip to the future projects is to be, when you're close to the communities, is a challenge that you're going to carry the rest of your life. In Minas, it's much more complex because of the history, but new operations need to make an effort avoiding having close communities because it's bound to generate conflicts with the communities due to the three things I just mentioned. Noise, dust. As much as I am within the specs, I am still impacting people. And since we mentioned empathy, try being in their places, and then we can talk again. We have a lot to learn. Very nice. Very nice, Paulo, what you just said. And there's also Professor Falcone's quote where he says, information, especially bad information, needs to go around within the company so that we know that there is an impact being caused and that the problem needs to be addressed quickly. Sometimes the information takes long to circulate and then the problem grows and then it's not good. Well, if you know it, you know it. It's better to kill the messenger, and the messenger oftentimes doesn't bring the message. I just wanted to elaborate on what you said, Paulo. We need to know how to share bad news too. If it's not working, of course, due to interactions, initiatives, this needs to be shared. Sometimes we undertake a risk of not carrying out communication, and not communicating, being silent, is also communicating in a way. If it's not working out, why is it? Am I the best prepared agent with the best legitimacy to be able to be interacting specifically with that community? Maybe I need to be holding hands and with the emergency response agents, because they are independent, impartial, legitimate, they have legitimacy, and they make these interactions be more significant. But what's the fundamental role? To share those challenges more clearly, so that we can always list those who are better suited to do that, in this case, provide the process. Maybe it's not me, the private person, or the business owner, or the public agents, but we need to share things constantly and clearly. We have thousands of challenges. If you're on one end of the process, if you change one of the parties or the partners, you need to rebuild the process as a whole among interests and process that we need to keep on feeding back. I don't see any other way out. Maybe we get another kind of initiative, which is not but the thing is, we need to build this with a better suited agent. We need to find solutions together. That's the way I see it. It ends up answering my question to Roberto, from Roberto, which is how can companies perform crisis management to improve dialogue with the government and the regulators? That's the path forward, constant dialogue. But Paulo mentioned an issue there, and in this world that's constantly connected, and we all have our voices, we can all vocalize by means of social media. How is this spokesperson figure? Are we all spokespeople? Well, this saying that only people in the company are spokespeople, this is no longer true. The biggest spokespeople in the companies, they are employees or contractors. They don't have the role, they don't have the title, but what they talk about and how they behave says more than what the CEO comes and says something. Keeping in mind that the last studies about trust say that over the years, official spokespeople have lost trust from the population, either the CEO, the presidents, vice presidents, and they lose that to whom? To people like us. I am able of trusting someone who posted on social media more than the speech from one of the CEOs of the companies. And actually, when there's a crisis, there are trends saying that it's important having the CEO whenever you need him or her. You need also technical people that will bring further credibility. If there is a food poisoning, for example, and I bring in a doctor, the doctor has a better credibility than a company CEO, because people only know that the company CEO is going to defend the company's point of view, is going to try to defend the company's interest. What I always say is that it's actually the opposite. The success cases is the opposite. People who have the necessary empathy to make a decision, even if the company is affected. The biggest cases of crisis management is when the biggest representative, takes accountability, says the truth, and they go, I don't know. That's an answer. We are used to hearing only nothing to declare, or people just up and leave because they're offended by the question. All the cases where the crises were successfully managed, number one in that company is that the CEO knew how to behave in that moment. There was no focus because it was impacted, was affected. I'm concerned with what's going to happen with the value of my company. Am I going to keep on operating tomorrow? If there are people that lost their family members or impacted, this makes a lot of difference. We are all spokespeople. You're here. You are spokespeople. When you're talking to anybody who knows that you work in IBRAM or companies A, B, C, or D, they know you're going to be taking a stance, regardless of what your job description is. We need to be really careful. This is not for us to be like a police force, to enforce anything. But there isn't personal social network. You can go, oh, there's only my friends there. No, nothing that you post on social media. Everything that's posted there, it's written there forever because people will take a snapshot, a screenshot, and then that's it. It's forever there, whether you like it or not. This is another side of this hyperconnection. And the new technologies, our cell phones that we carry with us every day. A lot of problems with teenagers, young people being involved in crisis. I just heard on the radio on the way here, I was scared. There was a network of people grooming women, young women, then they got nudes from those women and started talking or treating them as hostages. And actually having collective live torture sessions. What kind of world are we living in that forces teenagers to self-mutilate? And this is broadcast live. Technology should be for the good, but also it happens to be used for the bad. Of course, knowing how to use social media so that they are actually a communication vehicle is fundamental in this current world. There's a question from Daniel Perdigão. I think we managed to address that already, but there's a question here at the end. I'm going to ask Anna once again. I'm asking Anna a lot of questions. It's a question for the companies that work in the northern part of Brazil due to the difficulty and distance among the communities. How can communication be a vehicle to aggregate those communities and bring them closer to the companies, especially during the exercises that we have, the mandatory ones, the seminaries, drills, this whole agenda of activities that we hold within the crisis management agenda. Well, today I live a completely different reality than that one. Kinross mine is an urban mine. It's in a city. The distance from the first neighbor is 100, 150 meters. So there is no distance at all. Quite the opposite. And I think this also helps us reduce the invisible distances. So Paulo, you talked about an operation. Obviously, it needs to be more distant. Then it needs to be more distant to the community. But we also need to know to cohabitate, to coexist, and to share responsibilities in a territory. I think it's possible. They are not antagonical. We don't have to be on opposite sides, operation and community, but I have lived this reality when it comes to the continental distances. To be 3 days away, going upriver to a community, or in Kinross, operating in the desert, operating in frozen areas and very far away from communities. Communication has a fundamental role when it comes to the physical distance not being a contributing factor to the distance of relationships. Not being close doesn't mean that because you're not seen, you have to do less or communicate less. Communication in this sense, I think, has an opposite role, which is actually to be a spokesperson when it comes to bearing the voices of the intentionality of what's done. You don't have enough closeness, and without this proximity, it's hard to create a connection that's not visual. We know senses are fundamental when you want to create a connection. In this scenario, this is even more important, whilst being intentional. Well, very good one. Thank you, Anna. I still have a series of questions, but we are running out of time. We're going to have to wrap up our panel. I just wanted to say thanks to the panelists. I think it was a very enriching one, which adds a lot to the industry discussions. Thank you all in the audience as well. Thank you. Thank you, Lucas, Paulo, Ana, Cristiano. Let's take a picture.